Hello all, a big theme on this channel is that Western man is sleepwalking in a haze of globalist ideological liberal propaganda, and on the other side the money-pleasure dynamic, which also can be charted back to globalism. It's why the average Western man these days is more fussed about Premier League results and his girlfriend Love Island, or if she's a educated type feminism, than the state of the Western world, the state of our tradition. Now, I believe a lot of this is due to foul play, although I think it's also fair to say we're suffering from a sort of traditional exhaustion. It's why I often say Western civilization needs to go through a sort of death and rebirth. But the core point I'm making here is things are getting precarious at this point in history. There is a new global order forming, and we're so used to being part of the ruling empire, namely, part of the American empire, we're just not seeing it coming. And if Western man doesn't wake up, we will be conquered this century. We've already been conquered by globalism, but that's more a parasite, that's feasting on its host. What we face now is a changing world order, and if we're not awake to it, we really are in trouble. And what's even more worrying is we can't defend ourselves at all. Western man has been propagandized into believing the West is liberal values, and to be blunt, liberal values are paper thin. They're for homosexuals and feminists. They're not going to maintain a tradition and a civilization. As I've explored a lot on this channel, we're blinded by our riches and think we're safe with these liberal values, but they're really just a front for globalist money power, which will eventually gut out the soul of the West in its totality and move on to the next power structure to feed off. Now, I'm saying all of this because China held a huge military parade marking 80 years since its victory over Japan in the Second World War. This is a new dimension, of course, re-understanding the Second World War in the post-liberal era. But the reason I want to drill down on this is because Xi and the Chinese invited Putin and Kim from North Korea, and this was very much a show of a new world order, specifically for China, Russia and India. This clip is doing the rounds on Twitter, which is symbolic of how the Chinese think. You can see Modi, leader of India, is given what amounts to a royal welcome, whereas the Europeans on the top are mixed in with the rest of the world and arrive on some shuttle bus. Yeah, what I thought was most symbolically telling was Xi Jinping dressed up in his Chairman Mao communist style outfit. And it's very interesting this, because China really is more state capitalist than communist, and don't actually me down in the comments. I know they're ideologically still communist, quote unquote. But you have to remember 60% of their GDP now comes from the private sector, 80% of their workforce is in the private sector. Now, quite how free the markets are in China is highly contested, given the state does own the stock market. And traditionally in the West, we'd say, well, isn't that a form of government tyranny? But in the globalist era, we do have to ask, well, are they having enforced mass migration? Are they having this mass cultural propaganda forced on them because they don't have control of their own market forces? If we're still in the 1980s with Ronald Reagan saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, we're lost in time. That was 40 years ago now. A new world is upon us, and new battles are in front of us. Case in point, if we maintain this obsolete frame and see Xi Jinping dressed up as Chairman Mao and think, well, this is testament to his ideological commitment to communist economic policy and we're the free West, aren't we great? We're missing the point entirely. The reason Xi is dressing like this is to say to the West, we don't have to do things your way. We are different to you. We have our own power structure and we're moving towards that in the future, no matter what you think. Now, the best way we can understand this new global power structure and what it really wants, what it's rooted in, is to go back to the non-Western traditional world. This is specifically rooted in India, China and Russia, as I previously mentioned. A good way to understand this is to look to Alexander Dugin, often referred to as Putin's Rasputin type figure. Some people call him a communist, some people are fascist, some people call him a traditionalist, and some people say something new entirely. Now, to be clear from the top, many people think Dugin has very little, if any, influence over Putin, and others think he very much does. I personally think he does, because I don't really see Putin as a natural thinker and philosopher type. I'm not saying that Putin isn't a brilliant political operator. He clearly is, and he has that mystique about him. I often say he's got that Eastern European thing, like he's holding a tennis ball between his chin and his chest, and he looks at you through the top of his eyes. You never quite know what he's up to. But I often think Putin gets a bit too much credit amongst certain sections of the Western right wing, and I understand why. It's because these people are so starved of a leader who actually cares about his nation and his people rather than the interests of global capital and left-wing liberal ideology which is destroying their nations. It seems actively heavenly to have someone who's on your side. This is why I felt his famous interview with Tucker Carlson, despite getting rave reviews on sections of the right, was pretty boring. It was a bland historical review of the last 100 years. There wasn't much philosophical depth, there wasn't much exciting oratory. He just doesn't seem that talented in that arena for me. And this is where someone like Dugin steps in, because he is philosophically deep. He does have a vast understanding of the global arenas in the world, geopolitics and the traditions therein. And I believe that this piece, published on Twitter to little fanfare that Dugin's written, really tells us how Russia, but especially the rest of the world, thinks in traditional terms, not modern Western liberal terms, what the future's going to be like. Now, I'll link it below if you want to read it in full, but the first half is basically him saying how Russia, India, China are starting to find their feet as their own self-sustaining traditions outside of the Western globalist frame, and that he sees Russia as the true holder of Western civilization through orthodoxy. Now, you'll know if you're a regular viewer to the channel that I believe a tradition is absolutely vital for any civilization to maintain itself. You need the sacred core, and it needs to be practiced in your culture and your norms. Otherwise, you just see mass decay, which has happened in the Western world. So Dugin's argument is essentially, despite Western hegemony, it's being destroyed by its own material riches, and regions outside of the West have held on to their traditions and therefore can be born again and come to thrive. Quote, "We are not part of the West. Rather, the West is a degenerate version of us. They split away from civilization while we remain faithful to it. They are the prodigal sons who strayed into hell. We remain the bearers of our ancient culture, just as the Chinese are of theirs and the Indians of theirs." Hard to read, isn't it? But also hard to deny. The reality is that the West has turned away from our spiritual and religious foundations. We have turned away from our Greco-Roman philosophical foundations. We've turned away from our own tradition. What this means is we've gone to the market on one side and adopted socially liberal ideology on the other to pretend everything is okay. And now we're paying the price. Dugin offers further insight into how this new world order may well be thinking, but he also exposes a huge chink in the armour here. Quote, "After less favourable epochs, we, three reborn civilization states, meet again. Having recognised the depth of our own essence, before us stands a common enemy, the West. Trump might have been another sovereign Pole if he had overcome the hegemony of the globalists, as he intended, yet he has failed." Now, fair point on Trump. He certainly hasn't overcome the globalists. He's become part of the globalist structure, if he was ever intended to overcome it, by the way. That's a topic for another video. But I just want to read a couple more quotes from Dugin so I can really expose this chink in its fullness. Quote again, "The three poles of the multipolar world already exist. But the club of the multipolar world is open. In BRICS, a broader format than the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, there is space for the Islamic, African and Latin American worlds. The more the West attacks us, the closer we draw to one another. Even Trump contributes his part, making this process irreversible. Under his pressure, India joined us." Now he also ends by stating this: "We are entering the era of civilization states, while the West, in trying to maintain its hegemony, collapses. It is already clear to all, its hegemony has ended. This is its agony." Now, despite Dugin's obvious philosophical depth and I would say accuracy on the issues of tradition and the state of the world, he is also prone to a high level of naivety, it seems to me. I've actually seen this before. If you visit his Twitter page, I was quite excited to follow him. I thought, oh, one of the most controversial thinkers of the age, this should be fun. And you do get the odd really interesting posts like I've been sharing. But you also get tweets about Candace Owens and how, stunning she is in mind and body. And you think, oh, this is the sort of nonsense that, right-wing boomer dads in Surrey who vote for Kemi Badenoch say because they think it's right on. I mean, here he is getting involved in the Candace Owens, Brigitte Macron's a man fiasco. He states total support for heroic Candace Owens. Macron is a pervert. His wife is trans woman and trans monkey. He has to repent. I mean, this is just pure slop. Now, I'm raising this because it does show that as a thinker he might be prone to falling into over-dramatised stories with oversimplified narratives. And if we return back to this statement he made here, before us stands a common enemy, the West. Now, he's saying that this effectively unites the non-Western world, but he also states at the end that Western hegemony has ended. Now, of course, this is an obvious logical contradiction. If it's already fallen apart, then there's no common enemy to unite you. And I couldn't help but think about Peter Hitchens, who famously pointed out spokesman for Gorbachev and Gennady Gerasimov, who once teased the West at the fall of the Soviet Union by stating, quote, "We have done the cruelest thing that you could possibly have done. We have deprived you of an enemy." And this speaks to a fundamental truth of the state of consciousness modern man finds himself in. It's easy to create unities amongst disparate groups if you have the common enemy. I mean, look at modern Britain now. The reason why there's an alliance, although a shaky one, between the trans and gay types and the Muslims is because they have a common enemy in white Western man. When that goes, they'll be like cat and dog fighting. Now, you got to give Dugin a bit more credit than the trans-Muslim alliance because they're just idiots utilising utopian liberal ideology. I dare say Dugin is fully aware of the depth of tradition and how you can overcome the dualistic structure of three-dimensional consciousness. That is at the heart of many traditions, and many great spiritual masters have done that, but it's never been done on a civilizational level. So while you could say Dugin's future worldview may have some philosophical and spiritual credence to it, boy, is it a high aim. It kind of ignores the realities of geopolitics, and you see that when he starts speaking about the BRICS nations and the Muslim world and Africans and Latin American worlds all having their own centres and joining together in happy-clappy multipolarity. This worldview seems pretty utopian. It's almost positively communist in its orientation. I mean, do you really believe that the Islamic world, the African world, are all just going to get along completely equally? That's not the way the world has ever worked, and the traditional world included, which is rooted around hierarchy. So again, Dugin's worldview seems highly idealistic. The much more likely reality is one of those powers will come to the fore and dominate. That's the way it's always gone in human history. You just have to hope the one that dominates justly. Not to mention there are obvious geopolitical issues such as resources in the world. They're spread out all over the place, and it's always been the case that one region wants to have influence over another so it can have access to given resources, and that gives it domination on the global sphere. That's not just going to go away because the West crumbles. Another major issue is that while I would agree with Dugin in that you need to find the heart of your tradition and reawaken it to maintain your people and your civilization in the long run, the reality is that different traditions and civilizations have always clashed because they're making fundamental different metaphysical claims about reality itself. If you expect them just to drop those for some multipolarity, that's no different than Western liberalism, just reworked in another dimension. Now, we should say it could be the case that Dugin and Putin and even Xi are all aware of this contradiction, but they're actively playing ball at the moment in order to overcome the Western world, just as the differing minority groups in the West at the moment will all join forces in order to destroy the Western structure, and then they can try and create their own power structures after that. I mean, do we really believe that the Green Party's new joint deputy leader, Mohsin Ali, the Islamist type who screams about freedom for Gaza when he gets elected, will opt for upper middle class LGBTQ green liberalism over Islam when it comes to the grunge? You'd have to be Jeremy Corbyn to think he's going to go with the libs. Now, the reason Ali will go with Islam is because people are drawn to traditions which have deep spiritual, ethnic, cultural ties. This is how the real world works, and this is why I believe Dugin's multipolarity is doomed to fail. Another big error I think he makes is towards the end of his piece, where he states, the hegemony has ended, this is its agony. What does he mean by its agony? Whose agony? Because many people in the Western world are now saying that we know we need a death and a rebirth type thing. We can see we're completely lost in liberalism. I'm sure it won't be great for the globalists when it collapses, or the girl bosses, or the LGBTQ Love Island types, but for the true heart and soul of the West is probably what we need, and we could come back even stronger once it falls. There is no doubt we're in a changing world now. There is no doubt that Dugin's arguments about tradition are correct, but there is doubt about what the future world is going to look like. And it seems to me we do have to start grasping a deeper soil, get in touch with our own roots first. Of course, if you are interested in personal and spiritual transformation, that's why I created the sister channel, The Sacred Way. If you do want to join the Substack and get the exclusive calls and so on, that's linked down below. And on top of that, do let me know what you think about this in the comments, and do consider subscribing to the channel if you're new.